which was adopted by India in 2015, seeks to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all. So, but with the rapidly changing global employment landscape, students need to learn to think critically, be multidisciplinary amongst other things. There are so many other things listed in the NEP, and be prepared for gainful employment. However, the aim of any education policy has to be not only making the country a global knowledge superpower, but also instilling in the younger generation skills and disposition that support sustainable development as well as well-being. In terms of higher education, the policy seeks to end fragmentation of higher education, and it emphasizes on the creation of large multidisciplinary universities, colleges, and knowledge hubs that will aspire for students to become well-rounded across the disciplines. How well the issues of skills, entrepreneurship, and employability will be addressed is open for discussion. And today's topic of the lecture is precisely this: how well our economy and the labor market ecosystem will be able to respond to the new challenges that are being thrown as a result of the national education policy of 2020. Employability of the citizens should be the primary focus, and whether our economic landscape is equipped to absorb the trained manpower is something which we need to really ponder upon. These are the questions that should be raised. So to that extent, the NEP envisions imparting 21st century employability skills, which is big data, machine learning, technology, artificial intelligence, etc., in addition to creative and critical problem-solving thinking. Learning environment has to ingrain entrepreneurship, and this requires vertical and horizontal linkages with industries as well as incubators, besides internalization of the vocational education. An entrepreneurship ecosystem is also required to utilize the youth, which are going to be currently productively only a fifth of the graduates get gainful employment. So in that context, I think self-employment and entrepreneurship gains importance. Indian economy, however, is beset by a number of issues such as the declining labor force participation, especially of females, rising unemployment, ingrained skill deficit. So the state-led employment generation has to take a backseat, and the role of private sector is being emphasized, skilling as well as employment creation. Entrepreneur, but what is a level of support that is such as technology transfer, infrastructure creation, institutional support, credit availability, and other enabling factors, so that self-employment goals do not retain just a distress connotation, but these are actually going to emerge as very big challenges once this policy is institutionalized and we start having the products coming out of this as a result of this new paradigm of education, which is going to be adopted in our country. So I think in that context, today's seminar is very topical, and I'm very happy that Professor Vinoj Abraham has agreed to speak on these issues. Just a brief introduction, although Professor Abraham just does not need any introduction, and we have all read his very seminal papers, as well as we are familiar with his publications and books. He belongs to the Center for Development Studies, where he is also coordinating the NRP, the National Research Program on Plantation Development, which is funded by the Ministry of Commerce. His areas of research include labor economics, development economics, gender development, regional development, technology, and innovations. He has been focusing, his enduring focus of research is on phenomenon of jobless growth in India, structural transformation, and the problem of unemployment. He has also a considerable interest in wage studies, including wage protection system, implementation of minimum wages, etc. He did his PhD from JNU, and he has published extensively. He has been a consultant to a number of international agencies as well as national agencies. He has been part of the various expert committees. He is notably the recipient of the Sanjay Thakur Young Labor Economist Award, which was instituted by ISLE. So I really welcome Professor Abraham. I'm very happy that you are here with us and your talk on skill, entrepreneurship, development, and employability. We also have with us another eminent scholar in the form of Professor Keshab, who has very kindly consented to be the chairman as well as the discussant of this presentation. Again, Keshab, Professor Das is I think, a very good friend of the entire labor economics community. He is a professor at GIDR. He holds an MPhil in applied economics and PhD from JNU. He has been the recipient of VKRB Rao Prize in Social Sciences, particularly economics. Professor Das is an eminent scholar with numerous publications and numerous affiliations to international universities. I think I can list around 9 or 10 of them. So he has a considerable exposure in working under this different countries and under different disciplines. In addition, he also holds a degree of journalism, which I did not know, Professor Das, which was very enlightening. He has nearly 10 books and 110 research articles. And I think my familiarity with his work is because of his enduring interest in industrial clusters and innovations, which are very well known. And I'm hoping that he will also offer important insights into this dilemma of labor demand aspects, as well as issues such as education, industry linkage. Supplement Professor Abraham's talk. I welcome both of you, and I think now I give the field to Professor Das, whether he would like to initiate the discussion by his comments, or he would, whatever he Professor Das, the way he wants to chair this session. Over to you, Professor Das.
Thank you so very much. Good morning to all of you. And I'm so very happy to be part of this very significant event, which is sort of hosted by the Sardar Patel Institute of Economic and Social Research. And I feel happy also because I'm in the midst of friends and colleagues. And also, some of them are very, very eminent scholars on the subject that's on table. So given that, I'm actually looking forward to, of course, listening to the eminent speaker, Professor Abraham, who is also a very good friend of mine. And as Professor Mehta suggested, that he's very well known and very, very good empirical work. In fact, his work has been very widely cited in the policy circles by the academia. So he's an important contributor to the subject that we are dealing today. But then I also would like to say a small point at the very beginning, that maybe much of what we'll be saying and whatever little I might discuss, I think because of the presence of many eminent people in the audience, and to also get insights, I think, which is what is the purpose of this event. So let's also have quite some time for discussion with all of us. And without wasting any time, may I request Professor Abraham to go ahead with his speech, maybe what I think about 40-45 minutes. So please go on. And after that, we'll have question and answer session, and hopefully we'll make it quite useful to all of us and to the society at large. Thank you very much. So Professor Abraham, please.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Keshab Das. As he had said, we are not only academics, but also had been colleagues at one point of time, and now had been friends for quite some time. Thank you, Keshab Das sir, for taking up this role of chairman in this particular seminar. Thank you, SPIESR, Sardar Patel Institute, Professor Neeti Mehta and Dr. Hansa Jain for inviting me to give this lecture on skills, employment, employability, and entrepreneurship. I consider it an honor to spend my time with some of the eminent personalities working on this area. I look forward to, these are not original ideas. I'm sure some of these is already reflected. The things that I'm going to speak is already reflected in what Professor Mehta had said, and also what Professor Das has also mentioned briefly. I think so. These are going to reflect in my presentation as well. there may be one or two things that which may jar outside of what is popular thinking, but I think as academics, we have the freedom to say this, and I take this opportunity to use this academic freedom to express some of the things with regard to skill and employability in this country also. So I have a brief presentation, and Professor Das, please tell me when it is about 35 minutes, and I will wind up in another 5 minutes after that. Okay. I have made a longer presentation slides, but tell me, I will be able to shorten it. Okay. Thank you. Let me just this screen sharing is not available for the PPT. Can you just allow it for me?
Yeah, wait a minute.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, what I'm going to do today is to kind of focus on the three terms that was used in the topic, that is entrepreneurship, skill, and employability. This is the broad question that I would be looking into, and then I would be looking into. I will not be focusing entirely on NEP as such, new education policy as such, but I would show up what are the potentials in terms of new NEP's promises with regard to these three aspects, that is entrepreneurship, skills, and employability, the three questions that are raised, and what is being promised through the NEP and what is its potential. That's what I would be discussing. And I would also in towards the end, I would also be probably saying something about what should be the role of government itself in terms of skill training and employability question. And that may not be focused specifically on NEP, but the larger story about NEP is about this. And therefore, there is one or two things that would reflect on the NEP also with regard to this thing. This is the broad story that I would be following.
You can share the screen now.
Thank you. Let me just.
Yeah.
Yes. Is this visible?
Yes, sir. It is
yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, I'm going to take you through some of the very conventional ideas that we know about the requirement for what we call employment growth in this country and all those things. I'll start with the very well-known story about the demographic dividend story that we were talking about.
Maybe if you please make it a full screen thing, Vinoj.
Is it not in full screen now? I thought it was in full screen. 1 second. 1 second. Yeah. Now is it in?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if you go through the NEP document, there is this statement that that what is written over there in the introduction. It writes this: India will have the highest population of young people in the world over the next decade, and our ability to provide high quality educational opportunities to them will determine the future of our country. Right. So in the NEP actually is focusing on the story of demographic transition and the demographic dividend, and it is based on that particular story that the entire NEP kind of is thrown open. So the opportunity in terms of possible economic growth and also the requirement for providing employment to this large chunk of youth population that is coming in. That's the kind of broad story behind which NEP is kind of opened up actually. Now, going into the demographic transition and the demographic dividend that is expected through the through what we call demographic transition, there are four routes through which transition. Theoretically, there are four routes through which this transition brings in economic growth as such. Basically, youth bulge in the population, and that leads to rise in labor participation expectations. These are expectations, right? Rise in labor participation and physical productivity. If large chunk of work is done with physical labor, then physical productivity would be larger, and the rise in participation also would increase. The longer years of work life, because of the increasing life expectancy, leading to rise in productivity associated with work experience as such, that also increases the growth, contributes to the growth in the economy. A third aspect is the increasing female participation with the decline in fertility rates and the ensuing rise in economic growth due to greater participation of women in the labor market. And fourthly, the fourth channel is through savings due to expectations of longevity associated with the working and non-working people. This could lead to greater investment and that leading to growth. So these are the four routes that is theoretically placed by Bloom et al.'s work in 2000, Feminal work in 2002, through which demographic dividend comes about in a country, right? But this has certain very specific assumptions that are kept behind them, and that is very relevant in the case of India. The first one is that the entire youth bulge is committed to the labor market. That it is assumed that the entire labor market, would be acquiring all the youth bulge into the labor market. Secondly, and more importantly, there is sufficient employment opportunity to absorb this addition in the labor market. That's the second aspect. And the third aspect is that all added workers have the capacity and capability to be employed in this economy. So these three assumptions actually lie behind the demographic dividend story that we are talking about. Of course, there are other assumptions. If you think about it, we would be able to bring out much more of other assumptions as well. But these are relevant specifically in the case of Indian economy. And the relevance comes from these two aspects, which I'm not going to delve on much because it's a very much known fact. One is that the overall labor participation rates in the economy is declining. And that is mainly due to female participation rates declining. And so that is actually kind of fails in one of the assumptions that is made in the above, the demographic dividend. And the second part is that worsening unemployment. The worsening unemployment belies the second two conditions, that is sufficient employment opportunities in the economy probably not being generated, and also probably the unemployment is due to poor employability conditions. That is the second one that is mentioned, that all workers have the capacity and capability to be employed. So in other words, the current situation in the Indian economy does not promise the demographic dividend that can arise from the gains in the working age group due to the specificities of the labor market conditions currently, especially with regard to declining labor force participation and worsening unemployment. Now, in this context, the role of entrepreneurship, this is something that I'm going to take a lot of time on. Role of entrepreneurship plays a very important role in this particular context. Enterprises play an important role in realizing the demographic dividend. The government of India, specifically through various policies, various policy documents, as well as programs that has been introduced, also had been emphasizing on the role of entrepreneurship as the way forward for employment growth. Apart from the economic growth of the economy, employment growth is also emphasized through the rise of entrepreneurship. Now, for employment growth, the entrepreneurship route promises three routes through which employment growth can take place. First is, of course, as self-employed themselves. Second is as drivers of employment growth through output growth. That is, as output grows, the scale effect actually brings in more and more employment into these enterprises. So there would be some addition in employment over there. And as drivers of
can I just intervene just for a second? I will not write it on the chat screen because the control is to you, but I want to request all the participants to please mute themselves while the presentation is going on. Thank you. Sorry for
that's okay. Thank you. That would be helpful. Thank you. Yeah. So, and the third aspect is as drivers of employment growth through competition that arises within these firms and product diversification, kind of generating much more of number of firms that is required to survive, and that also leading to further employment growth. So, there are at least three routes through which entrepreneurship, expanding entrepreneurship, could lead to employment growth, and that is what the government of India also is emphasizing. The reason for emphasizing on role of entrepreneurship for employment growth. There are other reasons why entrepreneurship is being encouraged, but for employment growth, these are the three routes that they try to focus on. Now, I identified three challenges with regard to entrepreneurship in this country, right? Now, for India specifically, this is a challenging task. Though the government would want to do it, the entrepreneurship is a challenging task. I place three different challenges in the economy. First thing is that India is largely a self-employed economy. Now, if you call self-employment as entrepreneurship itself, then India is largely still continues to be largely a self-employed economy. A large share of the self-employed economy consists of persons who are engaged in survival as they are not able to position themselves in the wage labor market. In other words, what I'm saying is that there are a large number of self-employed persons in the economy. Given a better opportunity, they would have probably moved into the wage labor market rather than remaining in the self-employed labor market. Okay. Now let's look at some of the data that is available. This is the share of self-employed between the period 1983 and 2089. Now it is put in reverse order. I have not mentioned over there, but it is in when you look from what's called from right to left is the years increasing. So 83 is the rightmost one, and 2018-19 is the leftmost one, and urban female, urban male, rural female, and rural male are given over. Okay, RM refers to rural male.
I'm
RF refers to
extremely
rural
sorry.
female.
I'm extremely sorry. I think this Mr. C.S. Reddy's mic is really creating huge problems for us. We are not able to hear much. A couple of other mics are also on. If they can switch it off, it will be wonderful. Sorry, I'm extremely sorry.
Yes, I think, may we request all the participants to switch off excepting Professor Abraham who is speaking.
Mr. Reddy, Mr. Govind in JT, please unmute yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mute yourself.
Maybe there is some problem. It's not, the screen is not being displayed.
No, that is problem at your end. I think you have to look at your because
Yeah, one. Okay. Yeah. One second. I'm just driving. I think I'll just stop. Yeah, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
One second. I think there's some problem. I'll tell you.
Professor Abraham, you can continue.
Yeah, I'll continue. So the point that I want to make is, if you look at rural male, rural female, urban female, across the years, the thing that you would see is that it is the share of self-employed per 1,000 workers are mentioned over here. This is comes from the NSS data, which we are all familiar with. I don't want to spend time on all those things. But if you look at generally, what we see is that at least about in the rural areas, more than 50%, that is 500 per 1,000 working persons are self-employed persons. In the urban areas, roughly about 40% of the population, working population, are self-employed as right now. So, but one of the things that you can notice here is that in the recent years, at least in the very recent years, there is actually a slight decline in the self-employed in the population. For if you look at for rural male, rural female, urban male, in the urban female, a marginal decline you would see in the share of self-employed population as such. On the other hand, so in terms of levels, we have a very large share of self-employed in the economy. And in the recent years, we do see a small decline in the self-employed population as such, self-employed working population per 1,000 population per 1,000 workers in the economy as such, right? Now, compare it with the self-employed workers in the rest of the world. I have put a slide which shows the self-employed population in different European countries. These are taken from different papers. European countries, as well as table 1 that is mentioned over there. I'm sorry, I forgot to name the country over there. It's actually China over there, right? The table 1 that is mentioned in numbers, and the figures that you see is in Europe. Okay. Now you can see that the self-employed rate, the share of self-employment in these all the European economies, Greece has the highest at 30% of the workers, 30% of the total workers in self-employment, and the lowest is in Norway, which has got 6.6% as self-employed persons. In other words, and almost all of these economies that we are talking about are developed economies, right? Developed economies. So in other words, if you want to look at it, most developed economies have a much smaller share of their workers as self-employed, right? They have a much smaller share of workers belonging to self-employed compared to India. And if you take the case of China also, you can see this thing in rural labor, rural migrants, rural labor specifically, self-employed is only 12%. Rural migrants, it's about 52%, but those are migrant population. Permanent migrants, it is 4.7%, and urban areas, it is only 4.3%. In other words, an extremely small share of the working population in China is also belonging to what we call as the self-employed category. Now, I gave the story of China over there. I gave the story of Europe over there, just to keep a comparison with India. Now, compared to India, European countries, which we can call as developed economies, or China, which is also a higher income but middle income country, as such, has got much lower shares of self-employed in the economy. So one of the problems that I would pose is this, that what we are having actually is an excess of self-employment in the economy, and there should be ways of finding to reduce the amount of self-employment in the economy. That is one of the worries that we should be having with regard to this. Now, if you look at the trends across industries, if you look at during the period 2011-12 and 2018-19, self-employment has shown a rise. The share of self-employed in the total economy has shown a rise only in one industry, that is agriculture sector. All the other sectors which we consider as probably sectors with greater productivity than agriculture sector, in all sectors, we do see actually a decline in the self-employed, and there is a shift towards which the share in self-employment decline would also mean that there is a rise in wage employment assets, right? So one of the challenges I would pose as one of the challenges that we have as an Indian economy, in the Indian economy, is not in terms of increasing entrepreneurs as such, if you call it as increasing the self-employment, but rather reducing the share of self-employed in the economy. That's one of the key challenges, and how do we reduce it? It becomes an important question. Now, the second aspect is that the challenge is that the large share of the self-employed that we were talking about are unremunerative self-employment in India. Now, we can assume that individuals choose between self-employment and wage employment. Now, self-employment includes, apart from your earnings, whatever your earnings that you're making, includes risks and uncertainties associated with self-employment. Well, regular wage employment provides reasonable amount of earnings protection assets. Of course, casual wage employment does not provide that, right? Just when it comes to a choice between regular wage employment and self-employment, we should see that individuals are making an informed choice over there. When wage employment gives a reasonable amount of protection for their jobs that they have, and does not have to take the risks and uncertainties associated with self-employment, then obviously the choice would be between wage employment. The choice would be regular wage employment, right? But the downside of it is that possibly if the regular wage employment earnings are lower than the self-employed, then the possibility of working as an entrepreneur would increase.
Want to interrupt?
A bit of disturbance.
Some of the participants have not yet unmuted.
Muted.
Radha Rai, Govind Injeti,
No,
Professor.
ma'am, I'll tell you, Dhoni, there's some problem. The screen is not being displayed at all.
So I think in that case, maybe you have to leave this event and have it on the YouTube or something, because it is disturbing everybody else.
Understanding.
I think you have to leave this for everybody's sake.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm coming back. So what I'm saying is this, that wage employment, if given a choice between wage and self-employment, the risk of, given a choice between regular wage employment and self-employment, the risk of associated risk and uncertainties associated with self-employment must offset the returns that is available from wage employment, from self-employment, for a person to move to self-employment rather than being stuck in wage employment assets, right? Now there are risks and uncertainties, but there is no way to measure these risks and uncertainties for us. But we do get a clue from the wages itself, wages and earnings itself. Now, before we go to wages and employment, you can see, if you look at the Indian case, from the PLFS data, you can see that of the total self-employed in the economy, which we had said about 50% earlier, if you look at column 2 and column 3, a large share of these workers, rural, urban, or rural plus urban, you could, a fairly large share of these workers, especially among females, are unpaid or helper in the household enterprises status, right? And only a smaller share, it's not a smaller share, a substantial share of workers are own account workers and employers themselves. But at least a small share of these workers, whom we call as self-employed, consists of unpaid workers within the household enterprises themselves, right? So a segment of the workers involved in the self-employment themselves are not being paid any particular wages as such. That's one part of the story. The second part of the story is also interesting. If you can compare between the wages and earnings that are earned by the different groups of people, right? Now, obviously, earnings, wages is not there for self-employed persons. But in 2018, since the PLFS data has come in, they have started collecting data on earnings of the self-employed persons also. Now, from this, it is possible to make a comparison, a comparison between daily earnings and daily wages of the three different groups of casual, regular, and self-employed persons, male, females, and rural and urban. And it is interesting to see again that the rural wage labor, if you consider wage labor across the spectrum, whether it is urban, rural, anywhere, regular wage rates is much higher than compared to self-employed earnings or casual wage labor. Okay, that's the case across, whether it is rural, male, female, and all those things. So in other words, if a person has to make this choice between regular wage employment and self-employed persons, the choice seems to be pretty obvious here that a person would prefer to have regular wage employment rather than going into self-employed types of jobs, because he already has to take the risk of going through the uncertainties and risks associated with self-employment. And on top of that, he is going to get a wages that is lesser than the regular wage employment. Not wages, sorry, the earnings that would be lesser than the regular wage employment. Now, if you go to the case in particular to see is for female rural and female urban areas, where you can see that the returns is even lesser than that of casual wage labor. In males, it is not so high. The casual wage to self-employed is not so high. But for rural females, the story is that casual wage employment is even better than self-employed jobs at all. So the question about self-employment, in at least in the Indian case, right now it is actually skewed against self-employment. It is completely skewed against self-employment, and regular wage employment for males is certainly better, and casual or regular wage employment is certainly better for females, whether it's in the rural or urban areas. So in such a scenario, how do we expect self-employment to pick up in this country, what we call a remunerative self-employment in this country? That is the second challenge that we have. Now, the third challenge that we have is the size of industrial establishments. They continue to remain small, operating at scales probably that are less than efficient output levels. Okay, extremely small scale of operation of industrial establishments across the country. Now we have some. Let me show some of the evidences that we have with regard to this. Like MSME, if you look at 99% of all establishments that we have today belong to what we call as the micro units that we have, right? So in terms of size classification, I'm sure Professor Das would be able to talk much more about this thing than what but if you look at 99% of them are micro units, right? And if you look at the number of average persons engaged over the years, about 79% of the employment occurs in firms that has got less than 50 workers as such in 2012-13, right? Or if you take the case, the table the graph that is plotted over there is taken from the ASI and looking at the size classifications over there. Just to say this thing, that first two, that is the peak 1 and 2 that you see there, is for the classification 0 to 9 and 10 to 49. The rest of them are really flat. So the bunch of employment, the bunch of units, enterprises that we exist are actually extremely small units. Extremely small units that we are talking about. There is this argument of missing middle and all those things, but if you look at the data, and there is increasing evidence, there is actually what we are calling missing middling actually is a long tail. That's all. We don't have something called missing middle. We don't have that kind of a large number of large firms also. We have what is a very small number of large firms, but it is probably employing more number of people than the middle sized firms as such. So that missing middle story also we need to be worried. But in the context of the story that I was talking about, the important part is that the size of firms is extremely small. Okay, now that's the third challenge that we were talking about. Now, does economic development and size structure matter? This is one of the things that we need to worry about. Now, can we say that is there an optimal size for firms? I mean, do we say that a firm has to reach this particular size and then the firm becomes becomes a profitable enterprise? Yes, of course, we have economic ideas from microeconomics that we have learned on this thing, and it focuses on the question of returns to scale. Depends upon the returns to scale given a particular social environment and technological level. Now, this is very important to say this thing, as the social environment and technological level, depending upon that, a returns to scale is available, a particular scale at which a firm can work and achieve what we can call increasing returns initially and probably reach constant returns to scale in the long run as such, right? But this part of the story with regard to social environment and technological levels are very important. Why? I'll be coming up in that, talking about that. Yes, I think there is someone talking in between, but let me continue with
Participants, please mute yourself.
So very sad.
Yeah, it's okay. I think so. Yeah. So the earlier set of literature, that used to talk about the size of firms used to mention this thing that earlier literature support that manufacturing firms could achieve increasing returns to scale, hence the possibility of scalability, and therefore it was assumed that when the firms are large, the firms would be profitable, and therefore the profitability of firms itself would ensure that there would be large number of there would be enough enterprises that would be sufficient for that particular economy to grow. But newer literature talks that size, perhaps the large size of the firm itself is not an indication of profitability of the firm, and it could be that there are small sized firms also that are actually equally profitable like this large sized firms. And this comes from because of the earlier story that we were talking earlier, two lines that I had of the social environment and the technological level that provides for small scale firms to work, especially in the services industry. That is, the services industries too can function at increasing returns at smaller scale, and it has a possibility of scalability, but it's not in terms of size of the firm itself, but to becoming network economies, using network economies and becoming stronger. Again, Professor Keshab would be able to speak much more on this thing, but the possibilities are there through network economies. Now, what I was trying to say that there is no particular theory which says, I mean, there were theories which used to say that large size firms were required for economic development, but that particular idea about large size thing is declining. Small size firms are being increasingly considered as equally productive as bigger ones and could be equally efficient under given conditions. That is very important. Under given conditions, they could be equally efficient. But in India, what we are seeing is that there are a large number of small firms. These small firms are associated with higher employment generation. That is the focus of the government also had been that we should focus on micro and small and medium enterprises. Yes, they do provide higher employment generation, but this employment generation is at very low returns to the employer and very low wages to the workers also. These are, in other words, what we can call as inefficient firms that are working. A large number of small enterprises are inefficient firms. Probably these firms would actually gain by scaling up. We don't know what is the way. It may not be in scaling up in terms of size, but networks may be required, collaborations may be required. A whole lot of other kind of environment, ecosystem is required, which I'm coming to, is required for these firms to survive. So this third challenge that I was talking about with regard to size and entrepreneurship is associated with what is
Vinoj, just a moment, please. Yes, I think, Mr. Priyan, you have to mute yourself. Mr. Priyan, Mr. Maruti, please mute yourself. We are not able to hear the presentation. Mr. Maruti and Mr. Priyan, please.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Please mute.
So the case in India is this, that we have small firms associated with higher employment generation, and that's what we are always saying, that for employment generation, we should have small firms. But the fact is that if the small firms are not able to generate sufficient returns for themselves, then how would small firms survive? And why should they survive? But rather, these small firms would shift away, shut down, and go into wage employment where they would be finding better returns, right? So that is the kind of a conundrum that we are in terms of self-employment as such. Now, what are the given conditions under which enterprises grow? Again, Professor Keshab, I'm throwing some light on what you are doing. Okay. Now, these stories are very well known, and I'm sure, but let me just throw some light. Enterprises are known to grow as enterprises are known as monopoly rent seekers, right? Now, monopoly rent being the source of monopoly rent itself being innovations in products and processes. Innovations are systemic, and innovations in products and processes are different from inventions themselves. Now, inventions are random events that occur through scientific processes in some manner or the other. On the other hand, innovations is a systematic process that responds to economic systems. Economic systems as they respond to economic systems, and that is what.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
As you are the host now, will you please mute all from your side?
Or who, me? From my side?
Yeah, you will be able to mute all.
Let me just see.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, that's way to avoid all questions also later. One second, let me just find out how to do it.
When will people realize these things? I don't know.
Sir, if I mute, I'll be muting Keshab Das sir also. Okay, is that okay?
Yes.
If you need to raise anything, just show your hand or something. Okay, is that better? I think so. It's better now.
Great.
Okay, so getting back to the discussion. So innovations respond to economic systems as such. Inventions, probably not so much. Inventions are considered to be random and occurs in scientific labs as such, or sometimes accidentally. But innovations are not like that. They are planned, and they can be planned, and they do respond to economic systems as such. Now, one of the pioneers in the national systems of innovation puts this, that the system of innovation, or what we call as the ecosystem required for entrepreneurship to grow, is put like this: a set of institutions whose interactions determine the innovative performance of national firms. That is, it is basically a set of institutions that we are talking about. It is this set of institutions around which innovation takes place, which will drive not only innovation but entrepreneurship also, right? That is what is required in an economy, and some of the elements I have mentioned over there. Economic structure, that is basic economic structure of an economy. National policies and institutions, universities and research institutions over there. Input suppliers, these are all in here we are talking about the firm as the central element, and what are the requirements for the firm to be innovative. These are the questions that these are the requirements as institutions that is required around the firm for firms to become innovative, and that in a turn would lead to greater entrepreneurship as such. So universities and research institutions, input suppliers, competitor firms, demand structure, all of this. And there are a whole lot of other things also. I'm sure Professor Das would be able to speak on these things later on. But for the time being, for our purpose, I'm just highlighting on one or two aspects. And the most important in the particular context of new education policy, I'm going to pick up one of this, that is university and research institutions, which is what I'm going to focus on right now. Okay. Now, the challenges that I was talking about, one of the primary concerns, therefore, would be to create an ecosystem that would allow for entrepreneurship to survive and thrive. The ecosystem consists of a set of enabling conditions, an environment that encourages learning and innovation that allow firm growth as a primary condition, an institutional setup that encourages risk-taking and ensures against failure is equally important. In fact, on the question of whether a person would want to remain as a wage worker or turn into an entrepreneur, the requirement of knowledge itself may not differ so much, though in terms of specialization it will, but the cover against risks and uncertainty would be of utmost significance. No wonder, even today, you would see that India sees family and kinship-based enterprises are highly successful, but the other types, that is through credit facilities that are availed through formal credit, that are not so successful, because the insurance against failures families and kinships provide, but the government system or the formal systems do not provide such kind of a fallback against credit or risks and uncertainties that are faced by the by the firms themselves. And that gives a reason as to the biggest firms in India are still family-based firms, and one reason probably is this itself, that you have a fallback mechanism in terms of this thing compared to the other. And even the small ones also. If you look at the smallest firms also, you find this thing. It is actually family and kinship based. If you look at own account manufacturing enterprise, own account enterprises, these are family and kinship based enterprises. Sorry. Family and kinship based enterprises that we are talking about, right? So the smallest firms and the largest firms, India still is governed by family and kinship based enterprise systems rather than formal systems that will provide the kind of institutional facilities, formal institutional facilities that allow for entrepreneurship to kind of pick up. Now the question of new NEP and entrepreneurship. Can NEP be the institutional change that is required in the employment landscape? Yes, just come back. Let me just come back to you, sir. 1 second. Participants. Yes, sir. Can you speak now? You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, like, you're sort of kind of 45 minutes almost over. So, but you just go ahead. I mean, that's just as you had asked me to do that. Yeah.
Okay. What I'll do is I'll take another 10 minutes. Actually, I'm only halfway through, but I'll take another 10 minutes and I will finish. Okay.
Yeah, please.
Shall I mute everyone again? Shall I mute all?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So NEP, it has the potential. In fact, in the NEP, it gives us particular specific idea with regard to university industry linkages that NEP envisages. NEP has the potential in creating necessary knowledge and innovation institutional setup for entrepreneurship through university industry linkages that NEP envisages. Now, what are the potentials for collaboration between universities and industries? Universities are sources of idea. Universities is developing basic research and invention that leads to innovation. Universities are centers of innovation or incubation centers, and universities as providers of skilled labor. These are the 4 ways in which. Now, I want to take you to one study that we had done some time back in 2011, looking at university industry collaboration, what kind of results we got. We had a sample of about 459 firms. Professor Joseph and I had done the study, Indian firms looking at 4 industries. And these 4 industries were what we can call technologically advanced industries. These are not the medium technology, but all the high technology industry that consists of information technology, biotechnology, automobile, and some other industry. I'm forgetting that. 4 industries we had picked. And within that 4 industries, only 11% of the firms had recorded that they had any form of interaction with any university, Indian university, or a public research institution in India. Okay. Now, why didn't the firms interact with them? The firms felt that the university did not have the knowledge and the information that is required for firms. Only 3% of the firms felt that the universities that they interacted, this is among those who had interacted, only 3% of the firms acknowledged that the universities were able to provide additional suggested new projects or contributed to new projects. Only 3% of the universities were able to do that. Now, if you look at, and it is highly regionally skewed. Of all the firms that collaborated, you can see that in Mumbai, generally collaboration was low, but if you look at the large cities, you find that collaboration is generally higher. Bombay, Chennai, and Bangalore, they have 31, 32, and all those things. Go to smaller towns, Pune and Coimbatore, the participation, the collaboration rates are very low. Delhi is an exception, low collaboration rates despite being a large city. Now, what it is saying is that whatever collaboration is taking place is highly regionally skewed. You have the extremely large metropolitan cities or the mega cities having some forms of collaboration. The rest of the hinterlands, the small towns, rural areas, probably there is nothing going on over there in terms of university industry collaboration. Right? Now, why universities and why firms are not collaborating with these firms? You can see this thing. 23%, the second highest share was this thing. 23% of the firms said universities have no understanding of our line of business. And 19% of them said PRIs have no understanding of our line of business. So there is a complete mismatch between what is going on in the firms and what is going on in the university system as such, right? Now, this is very important. If you are focusing on university industry interaction, we have to set up the university industry institution. So if there is an institutional failure over there, what is the institutional failure? To my understanding, it is a lack of incentive structure that actually institutional structure that incentivizes both parties, that is universities and industries, to take part in interactions. For universities, only your API matters. It doesn't matter what you are doing. Your API score is what is important. You keep on writing something or the other and keep publishing something or the other. It doesn't matter for the industries. And for the industries, your innovation, your paper doesn't matter. All the innovation that is required is available from imported goods or from imported knowledge. You don't have to depend on the inferior knowledge that is available in the inferior. So there is actually a mismatch in terms of, but it is not to say that it is not possible. There are actually university incubation centers in the world. Singapore has got university has incubation centers for firms to grow. There are firms where university collaborations are extremely strong. But what we have today is a very weak university industry system. Okay, I have something about education skill and all. I'll just quickly take to the last slide probably. We know the story, basically saying that we have a large number of educated people, but the skills is, so I have also drawn the skill, different types of skill, general education, technical education, vocational training, all these I have drawn, and I have come to a thing where which we call what we call the skill poor in this country. And we can say that about I identify those people without any type of skill component, formal skill component, formal or informal skill component. That's a skill poor. That is not literate, no technical education, no vocational training. In that case, we have a small percentage, about 15% of the Indian population is without what we can call a skill poor. Similarly, 7% in the urban poor. But what we can call as with some amount of skills that is required for any types of labor market participation, only about 40% of them have that, right? Any types of something like if we call primary school and so I will go to the next thing. And educated unemployment is the highest that we know the story. I'm not going to repeat the story. Educated unemployment being extremely high, especially among the youth. It is not a problem with the older people. Older people, actually, education unemployment is very, very low. For people well above the age of 29 or 30, education unemployment is extremely low. But for the younger people, this is an extremely big concern that you do find that education unemployment being very low. Now, the question is again going back to this thing. Unemployment rates being very high, especially at the educated, the share of educated is itself being very low in the labor market. If there are too few educated people in the labor market, and even among them, unemployment rate is high, then is the solution giving more education? I mean, that is a worry that I am having in my head, that we are having very high unemployment rates and we have very few educated in the labor market itself. But then the policy angle is always saying that we give more education. Let's pump in more education. So that's a worry that I have in my mind, that probably more education, is that what we require, that we should be worrying about? Does our system have the capacity or the capability to absorb such kind of education? That's something that we need to worry about. And the last thing that I want to speak about this is something that I want to speak about. So let me just take a minute on this and I will stop. This is a story about skills and enterprises. Separation of skills from training is a part of the industrial economy. Before that, skilling was part of the firm itself. Now, increasingly, state is provisioning for the skill development in the economy. But I would say that enterprises should go back as skill providers themselves. Firms are best placed to know what skills are needed, not the state. Firms are best placed to train their workers, not the state. Firms are also the chief gainers in skill training, not the public. Therefore, the firms themselves should be taking up this thing. Now, there is a phenomenon called skill externalization and employability. If instead of skills are being imported outside the being imparted outside the firm, more and more of such skills will get externalized from the firm, and all such externalized skills from the firm would be increasingly be called or challenged as a lack of employability itself. Now, coming to the question of employability, for firms to remain competitive in a knowledge economy, they must recognize skill obsolescence and be ready to reskill their workers. In fact, lifelong learning, as the NEP says, then is a well-known feature of workers in the knowledge economy. Under such circumstances, firms and their lobbies are quick to reduce this complex phenomenon into a lack in the workers and name it as employability itself. In fact, what labor market participants lack is the skill requirements that are ever changing in the firm. The government may at best be able to facilitate such possibilities of firms becoming the skill trainers than the state itself becoming the skill provider over there. Now, let me just skip this thing. In the last slide that I would just put this thing in discussion, we can discuss it. There is a changing discourse from employment to employability. The policy tools available for employment growth, especially from the demand side, direct intervention by the state, is more or less vanished. There is nothing called a demand side intervention that is possible by the state. State having lost the policy's place on employment generation, the role of private sector in job creation is being highlighted. Private sector, on the other hand, is now externalizing its own requirements as state failure in provisioning for quality education, and is it naming it as employability? This I will just end it as a question. I will stop here. Thank you very much. Oh, I had to show my last slide. This is a photo that I had taken. Thank you. Okay, 1 second. I'll just unmute 1 second. So it is unmuted. I think so. It's all open. I think so.
Yeah. So I do not know that just saying thanks is enough.
Thank you.
I think this is a great presentation. Very, very well thought through and very nicely sort of like, I think Vinoj touched on several aspects. He sort of, on the one hand, he showed his skill in terms of the empirics that he is so very familiar with. He also provoked us more than once by raising a number of questions. But then I think those provocations and those the presentation grounded in evidence probably are the hallmarks of quality research that Vinoj is known for. I'm extremely sort of privileged. I'm very happy that he could sort of in this just 1 hour, he could sort of tell us so many things. Because he presented it so smoothly, so lucidly, I don't think I can add much to what he said. But then let me take about a few minutes, and I think I actually look forward to the floor discussion, which I think will be a much more richer way to engage with this event. I think some of the things he very clearly sort of pointed out related to unlike this very significant rise in or consistent rise in self-employment as a group, and which is also directly or indirectly linked to the employment question that we are talking about, like sort of broad-basing access to employment, sort of even the skill entrepreneurship. I think these are all sort of linked to that question. He also sort of within that pointed out it's also the declining women participation in the labor force, apart from the labor force participation itself going down. And there have been sort of serious institutional issues, for instance, like what kind of skill who would be providing, whether it's a private sector, public sector, what role the universities should be playing. And apart from that, we are also talking about employment not just in terms of mere numbers. We are talking in terms of like employability. I mean, the point that Vinoj emphasized so very much. So in that, I would think that all that we're discussing, whether it's sort of creating opportunities for entrepreneurship, creating new skills or reskill, all that sort of brings us to the very simple question of what kind of profile we have. Like if you have sort of, it is not correct to say that we did not invest in skill creation. In fact, we have a long history of several institutions, including the ITIs, including the Entrepreneurship Development Institute. And several initiatives by, but then the question is whether those skills and those trainings in entrepreneurship have been relevant. So that relevance question is what we really have to sort of think through. And one particular aspect which I would sort of try to add a little bit to what Vinod said is this whole world of, let's say, the rural economy, or sort of like the, let's say, these small towns, rural economy. That's where you have this unemployment challenge lying there. So do we have sort of thoughts in terms of like what all inputs are needed, what kind of intervention we are talking about in terms of, let's say, providing certain basic infrastructure. It is not just enough that I have a degree in entrepreneurship or I have a certain skill certificate with me, but then to run a little unit, I may have to have access to electricity, for instance. So those kind of very basic requirement. Then there are several verticals. So the vertical one, maybe you may talk in terms of education or sort of whatever, enabling sort of environment in terms of learning. But then there are verticals of production. There are verticals of distribution. There are verticals of markets. So if you are talking of entrepreneurship, that cannot be bereft of also sort of familiarizing with